You spent 11 minutes last Tuesday deciding between two brands of pasta. Not because you were hungry, not because you cared about the taste, but because one was 14 cents cheaper per serving and your budget spreadsheet was watching. You chose the cheaper one. You felt smart, disciplined, in control. But here's what actually happened. Your brain released cortisol. Your heart rate ticked up. And for those 11 minutes, your nervous system treated a pasta decision like a survival threat. This isn't about being cheap. It's about something far more dangerous. It's called financial burnout. And your perfect budget might be the thing slowly breaking you. Let's start with an uncomfortable truth. Most people think budgeting is about control. And at first it is. You download an app. You link your accounts. You create categories. You set limits. And for the first time in a long time, you feel like you're winning at money. But somewhere between being financially aware and tracking every single cent, something shifts. The budget stops being a tool. It becomes a scorecard, a performance metric, a test you take every single day. And there's no finish line. You start checking your balance at red lights. You refresh your app before bed. You feel a strange guilt buying coffee, even though you budgeted for it. Because now it's not about the money. It's about the variance. 0 cents off. That's the goal. That's control. But here's the thing. Control is an illusion when it requires constant vigilance. You're not managing your money anymore. You're being managed by it. And the modern world has made this worse. 20 years ago, you balanced your checkbook once a month. Now, you have real-time notifications, instant updates, a running scorecard in your pocket that never stops judging you. Banking apps were supposed to make life easier. Instead, they turned budgeting into a 24/7 psychological chore. You're not more in control. You're just more aware of every micro deviation, and your brain is treating each one like a crisis. Let's talk about what's actually happening inside your body. You're standing in the grocery store. 2 jars of pasta sauce. One is $3.49, the other is $3.99, 50 cents. Rationally, it doesn't matter. You can afford both, but your brain doesn't care about rational. It sees a decision, a trade-off, a potential mistake, and it responds the way it's been programmed to respond for thousands of years. Threat detected. Your amygdala lights up. Cortisol spikes. Heart rate increases slightly. And suddenly, choosing pasta sauce feels like defusing a bomb. Now imagine doing that 30 times a day, because that's what hyper-optimized budgeting demands. Every purchase is a negotiation. Every dollar is a decision point. Every variance is a failure. Your brain isn't built for this. Decision fatigue is real. And when every financial choice requires high-stakes internal negotiation, you're draining a resource that doesn't refill easily. Studies show that after making too many small decisions, people experience reduced willpower, impaired judgment, and increased stress. You're not just budgeting. You're burning cognitive fuel on things that don't move the needle. And here's the kicker. Your brain doesn't distinguish between a $50,000 investment decision and a 50-cent pasta decision when both require the same mental energy. So you spend your day sweating the small stuff. And by the time a decision that actually matters comes along, a career move, a side hustle, a relationship choice, you're too mentally exhausted to think clearly. The budget won, but you lost. Let's do some uncomfortable math. You spend an hour each week clipping digital coupons, comparing prices, and hunting down deals. That's 52 hours a year. Let's say you save $600 annually doing this. Congratulations, you just paid yourself $11.53 per hour. Now ask yourself, what's your actual hourly value? What could you have earned or learned or built in those 52 hours? Because here's the truth most people don't want to hear. Extreme frugality often costs more than it saves. Not just in time, in energy, in relationships, in joy. You skip the dinner with friends because it's not in the budget. You avoid the networking event because of the $20 cover. You say no to the spontaneous weekend trip because it wasn't pre-planned in your spreadsheet. And sure, you saved money. But what did you lose? The friend who could have connected you to your next job. The random conversation that could have sparked a business idea. The memory that would have reminded you why you're working so hard in the first place. There's a reason wealthy people don't coupon stack. Not because they're wasteful, but because they understand opportunity cost. They know that mental energy is finite. That time is the one resource you can't get back. And that optimizing for pennies often means losing dollars. Saving 3% more isn't worth it if it costs you 10% of your peace of mind. Here's a question worth sitting with. What could you create if your brain wasn't constantly doing financial math? Because right now, a huge chunk of your mental bandwidth is occupied. Not by big decisions, by small ones, endless ones. Can I afford this latte? Should I use this coupon? Did I categorize that expense correctly? Am I over budget this week? It's background noise. Constant. Exhausting. Invisible. And it's stealing space that could be used for strategic thinking, for creativity, for growth. Psychologists call this cognitive load. The total amount of mental effort being used. When your load is maxed out by micro-optimization, there's no room left for the stuff that actually changes your life. You can't think long-term when you're trapped in short-term management. You can't build wealth when all your energy goes toward protecting what you already have. And here's the cruel paradox. The more you optimize for the future, the less you're able to actually live in the present. You're so focused on the perfect budget that you forget what the budget was for in the first place. Financial freedom isn't just about having money. It's about not thinking about money every single second of every single day. So what's the solution? It's not to stop budgeting. It's to stop over-budgeting. It's to build a system that runs on autopilot so your brain doesn't have to. Start with this. Build in slack. Not waste. Not recklessness. Slack. A buffer. Room for error. Space for being human. Because the goal isn't a 0-cent variance. The goal is sustainability. If your budget requires perfection, it's already broken. Instead, create categories with margin. Give yourself permission to be 5% off, 10% off. Not because you're lazy. Because you're smart, you're designing for the long game. And the long game requires rest, not constant vigilance. Next, shift your mindset from restriction to allocation. You're not depriving yourself. You're deciding where your resources go. That's power. That's agency. When you stop seeing every dollar as a loss and start seeing it as a tool, the entire psychology shifts. You're no longer playing defense. You're playing offense. And finally, define your enough point. This is the most important step. At what point does more optimization stop adding value? At what income level can you afford to stop sweating the small stuff? At what savings rate can you breathe? Because if you don't define enough, you'll chase perfection forever. And perfection isn't the goal. Freedom is. Here's what nobody tells you about money. The point isn't to have a perfect budget. The point is to have a life you don't need to escape from. And if your budget is making you miserable, exhausted, and mentally drained, then it's not working. No matter how mathematically perfect it looks on paper. Financial health isn't just about the numbers. It's about your nervous system, your relationships, your ability to think clearly and act decisively. It's about waking up and not immediately checking your bank balance. It's about making a decision without an internal crisis. It's about living. So maybe it's time to ask yourself, are you optimizing your budget? Or is your budget optimizing you? Because one of those leads to freedom, and the other leads to burnout. If this hit home, drop a comment and tell me, What's the smallest financial decision that's taken up the most mental space for you lately? And if you want more honest breakdowns on money, mindset, and the stuff nobody talks about, subscribe, because we're just getting started.